Hello and welcome to the Repurpose Your Purpose podcast. My name is Aurora Menegallo, and today I have an amazing guest here with me. Hi, Linda.
Hi, Aurora. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for coming. All right, I can't wait to start the conversation. But first, let me give you, the audience, a little bit of an explanation of what this podcast is about, and then a little bit about Linda, and then we'll start with the questions. So, if you're new to the Repurpose Your Purpose podcast, this podcast is about doing work you love, whether you already know what that is and you want to get better at it, whether you're growing in your leadership abilities or you're a little lost and finding your path to a career that will truly fulfill you. So I like to have a variety of guests and conversations and to go with the flow. All right, so today we're in for a treat, and let me tell you a little bit about our guest. I'm a very, very big fan of her work. Dr. Linda Sandel Pettit is a distinguished author, speaker, trainer, and mentor, renowned for her insightful work, including her acclaimed memoir, Leaning into the Curves, Trusting the Wild, Intuitive Way of Love. With over 5 decades dedicated to writing, 4 decades immersed in counseling psychology, and 2 decades serving as a spiritual mentor, Dr. Linda brings a wealth of experience and expertise to her writing, speaking, and client work. Linda holds a doctorate in counseling psychology, a master's degree in counselor education, and a bachelor's degree in journalism. I forgot to ask if I said your name right.
You did. It was beautiful.
Okay. Whew, all right. So I thank you again, really. I'm a big fan of your book, your podcast. I have so many questions. It was even hard for me to wrap my head around what do I want to ask. So here we go. I thought that since this is a podcast about doing work you love, I would really like to start by asking you, how did you find your vocation and how does it continue to evolve? Like, really, how did you find it? And then nurturing this passion, this evolution, I'm blown away.
That's such a wonderful question. And I've thought a lot about it since you wrote me and suggested that you'd want to ask it. And, you know, I had this thought that if my 21-year-old self had been able to talk to my 70-year-old self, and my 70-year-old self could tell my 21-year-old self what she was doing, my 21-year-old self would have been like, "Oh my God, how did you ever get there?" Because my that wasn't what my 21-year-old self had in mind. So it's interesting. I worked in a university setting in higher education administration as a dean of a graduate college for 5 years, 6 years almost. And I remember telling students, you know, you don't most of us don't know the big plan. You start somewhere where your heart leads you, and then just trust that it is going to change and it is going to evolve. And I remember years ago reading a book by Mary Catherine Bateson. She was the daughter of Margaret Mead, the famous anthropologist. And Bateson commented that in previous generations, like my parents and their parents, people went to work at a job and they tended to stay at that job for 50 years. And Bateson, and this was written like 20 years ago, Bateson was saying if you look at the Department of Labor data, it suggests that most people are changing jobs and the work they do within those jobs every 2 years. And I suspect that's still true, if not even tighter. And as I watch my own kids, and I think, wow, if we could just free ourselves from the notion that uh, we have to figure that out, and just really trust that life is evolving us life is moving through us, evolving us, that we are sourced in a divine intelligence. And if we are listening to the best of our abilities for that divine intelligence, we can't miss our purpose. Is the way I think about it is the only purpose we have really is to be loved, loving, and lovable. End of story.
That's beautiful.
And if we are there, if we keep our eyes and our souls and our hearts focused on that, then the particulars will unfold for us. So as you know from reading the book, and if you look at my bio, I started out in journalism. And in a kind of funny way, I didn't get the job I was hoping for in journalism. I hoped to work as a newspaper reporter, and it didn't happen. In fact, I left college, and after a round of interviews with big and small newspapers and getting rejected, even though I had a really substantial career already in newspaper writing, I landed the first job I landed post college was in the basement of an insurance company, typing insurance contracts. That was pretty devastating.
I
Just
can
me and
imagine. Yeah, I'm sorry to laugh, but I'm like, I'm laughing not to cry, because that's a lot of the times what happens. We get really crushed, especially when we're young.
yeah, and so here I am in this windowless room, hunched over an IBM Selectric machine, working on typing insurance contracts in 8-point type, and I had to use little like lift up tapes every time I made a mistake. And so I'm sitting there thinking, okay, I've always wanted to be a better typist. So while I'm at this job, I am going to set my goal to type 100 words per minute in perfection. And so every day, that's why I was doing my work. I was teaching myself to type 100 words per minute without making a mistake. Well, after about 4 months of doing that, my boss, who was the only other person in the basement working with me, I don't even know why I needed a boss, frankly. And this guy was really a lovely person, but very anxious and socially very introverted and shy. And he called me in his office and he couldn't even look at me. He said, Linda, I don't even want to say this because you're the most reliable employee I've had. You show up for work on time. You stay late if you need to. You're so motivated to get this done well. But this job is wasting your talents. And he said, I have a friend who I needs a graphic designer in a small printing company. I think you would really enjoy him. And so why don't you go talk to him? And I had some graphic design experience. I'd been the graphic designer on a newspaper I worked for. So I had a little background, but this would be a job where I was designing menus and business cards and promotional materials. I didn't have any background in that. But I went and talked to this guy who said, oh, we understand that your work ethic is great and we're willing to train you. And then I had two of the most fabulous years of my life working in a beautiful little company, enjoying people, learning about graphic design, perfecting my skills, getting training. This was this was during the time when the first machines that were capable of producing multiple fonts actually came on the market. And so it was all this cool technology evolving. So 2.5 years into that job, I'm sitting one day in my office and I think, gosh, I really wanted to be a writer. I love this job. I'm really having a good time, but really want to be a writer. That day, and there's a point to this story. That day, as I was going to go home, it was a Saturday, I was working overtime. I left the office to go the way I would normally go to go home. And I get to a stop sign and I hear this little voice in my head that says, don't go left the way you usually go to the right, make a right turn. I was like, what? But it was so clear and so insistent. I said, okay. So I turned right and I'm just meandering. I got to another stop light and it said turn right again and go through Canton, Michigan. So I'm thinking, okay, I know the way to get home going that way. That's fine. I mean, it's a little bit out of the way, but it's not too bad. I get to Canton, Michigan, a little voice in my head says, stop at the CVS drugstore. I'm like, I don't need anything from the drugstore. This is what's going on in my head. I don't need anything from the drugstore. Stop. So I think, well, okay, it's hot. It was a summer day. I'll go in and get a tea. So I get in, got a tea, and as I'm standing at the checkout counter, I look down and I see the Ann Arbor newspaper, and I was not a fan of Ann Arbor. Anyone who knows anything about the states and the rivalry between University of Michigan and Ann Arbor and Michigan State University in East Lansing knows that if you're a Spartan from East Lansing, as I was, you're not particularly fond of Ann Arbor and the University of Michigan.
I
So I thought,
just learned something.
why would I buy this paper? So I buy it. I go in the car and then I hear as clear as a bell, go to the classified ad section, open the classified ad section, and the first thing I saw was a job for a company called ComShare for a corporate communications specialist. And they wanted someone who had a background in writing, a background in graphic design, which I now had, and an interest in photography, which I had. So I thought, I'm going to apply for this job. Went straight home, applied for it. 2 weeks later, got an interview, got hired, and was off on an 8-year career in writing corporate communications and public relations for a wonderful company. And my point is that as I look back on that, what's striking to me is that every job I had, I just approached with love. I'm going to love this. I'm going to find something in this that is new and fresh and evolves me. And when I say love, we talk about love as a feeling, and it often does have beautiful feelings attached to it. But I think there's a bigger definition in my mind. I think of love as a creative force. My spiritual teacher, Sydney Banks, in the second chance wrote, love is not just an idea. Love is a living, breathing essence that the wise can pluck from the air at will, and then, like a master artist, mold it into something beautiful. So when I think of love, that's what I think of, that there's this creative, conscious energy that I call love that is moving through me, that is always evolving me, and is the stuff of creation. It'll create whatever I tell it to create. And a wise person tells it to create beauty. And so I don't know that I was particularly wise at 21 years old, but somehow I knew, find something beautiful here. Perfect your typing, learn to do graphic design. Stay open when this still small voice in your head says, go do this, go do that. And so I start this public relations job. And then as a natural flow in the public relations job, I start becoming a confidant to executives that I work with. And my boss, who was the president of the company, says, people really love to go and talk with you. And I said, yeah. And, I'm thinking if I got a counseling degree, I could do a better job. He said, I think you're right. They paid for my entire master's degree in counseling. And then I was off on an entirely new track. I stayed with the company a couple years and then eventually made a decision to leave a very lucrative job that by today's standards would have been a 6-figure income. And I was only 25. I elected to go and take a job as a volunteer in a mental health agency for at-risk youth, because something in my heart said, I knew that the next step for me was to be a counselor. And then my whole career trajectory and counseling and psychology, and then eventually the principles and all the things I do just started to evolve from that. But I couldn't have predicted any of that at 21, couldn't have ordered that. It just evolved from a place of trusting love.
You just gave a masterclass in career change. I'm gonna send this to anybody that gets in touch with me. There's so many things that I just love. I mean, the one thing that when you share your story to me, it's so impactful is that you knew to follow that voice. Because so many of us have an intuitive hunch, whether it's a voice or, some other way.
So
And
true.
we really have to learn to follow and recognize it. And so that's
Yeah.
beautiful. But also, really like how you're talking about seeing your purpose, like a lot of the time we don't even realize what we're following until afterwards. And it was always there. And it's so
Yeah.
beautiful. So beautiful.
Yeah.
Wow. Um, all right, let me see what I want to ask you next. I almost want to like take a moment here to just savor what you share,
Yeah.
especially about love. So, as I said, I'm a big fan of your work and your podcast, which is called The Intuitive Way of Love. I'll put
Hmm.
I'll put links, in the notes, anybody who's listening, so you can check everything out.
Sure.
But one thing that I really love, actually, and I heard you talk about in the past, is listening. And you just
Mm.
mentioned it a little bit, right? And I was wondering if you can share a little bit about the importance of listening, your relationship to listening, what you understand about listening, both as a human being, but also as a professional, as a therapist, as a coach.
Mhm. Yeah, that's such a beautiful topic. And I think of listening myself in a multidimensional kind of way. Like it's about for me listening within to the intuitive guidance that love is always providing. It's about listening to life. What is the feedback that life is giving you? I'm a great believer in synchronicities. That when I'm in alignment with my inner listening, I can expect to see synchronistic experiences around me that support the path I'm on because of my understanding of the oneness of life. So I listen both within and without. What's life telling me? And then listening to others. And I don't know that I'm a particularly good listener to others, frankly. I think that's something I've had to develop. And certainly in a way, I wonder if my attraction to the field of psychology wasn't the way the universe was strategically architecturing my life so that I would become a better listener. Because really that's what psychology and counseling are about, is a lot of experiential learning related to becoming a good listener so that you really hear what other people are saying. I think you mentioned that we're all intuitively guided and we may not know it. I think that's really true, that we are all guided through life, and many people just don't notice it, or they discount it, or they take it for granted. And I think some of the stories I share are oriented to try to helping people learn to listen within. In my book, I talk about one story where I was at a retreat on the desert here in Phoenix, Arizona, and I was sitting in a Native American talking a circle with several medicine men from the Pima tribe, and each person in the circle was given an opportunity to share. They were passing a talking stick around, and when the talking stick came to me, I talked about some of the experiences I'd had in my life of feeling silenced. And I'd had a number of things that most people would, if I were to talk about them, would say, "Wow, that was pretty darn traumatic. That was pretty challenging." But I had a number of things happen that I felt somehow my voice had really been taken from me, and I'd gone quiet. I found it very difficult to speak my truth. I think a lot of women resonate with that. But as I was telling this Native American healer about that and saying, "Oh, I'm just so shy and I'm so introverted and I find it very difficult to speak up and I always mistrust what I'm speaking." And he stopped at one point. He and his partner were drumming, and they were drumming really loud, and I was starting to get really frustrated. Why are they drumming so loud? I'm trying to talk. And finally he silences the drums and he says to me, looks at me like I'm kind of like crazy. And he says, "Didn't you say that you are a counselor?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I am. I'm fairly new in the field, but I am a counselor." And he said, "Some of the experiences you've had may have felt like they robbed you of your voice, but did they not force you to go inside and listen within? Do you not have a really active inner life and a really deep connection with inner wisdom?" And I said, "Well, I, I guess I do." And he said, "Why would you be boo-hooing about the very thing that gave you your gift? Yes, you were forced to go inside, but you learned to listen within uh, in a really beautiful way. And that's a fundamental to the vocation that you're in." And it was like a total shift in the way I saw that. Wow. Yeah. Not feeling like I had a voice did force me to listen deeper within and listen deeper to what people were saying and listen deeper to what the world was saying to me. And then as I got deeper and deeper into the counseling profession, I realized that there were still levels of listening that were yet to unfold for me. I did my dissertation on empathy, and empathy is a pretty big deal, and certainly a very big deal to people who are in the counseling and psychology professions. You want to be able to listen and understand, have a resonance with what people are saying to you. But as I sat with people and really had become a much better empathic listener, I also started to realize that there was another level of listening that I didn't even have a language for. That people would come in to talk to me as a psychologist, and I could say back to them, this is what I'm hearing. This is what you're experiencing emotionally. This is what led to your having that kind of feeling. Do I understand you? Do I have it? Is there anything more you'd like to say to me about that? I really, really want to be able to sit with you and have you say, "You get me. You get where I'm at." But I was also aware that in every story of trauma or hurt or depression or anxiety or psychosis or whatever it was that people were telling me, there was a hidden beauty. There was hidden in their narratives times when they simply seemed to slip the shackles of their difficulties and be in a state of love, do loving things, do helping things. And I began to think that there really was something in human beings that was unbreakable, unshakable, that there really was a connection with this creative, conscious force of love that nobody ever lost. But if I, as a therapist, could reflect it back to people, they would be able to notice it more. And we could not only look at the pain and the struggle, but we could look at the potential for growth, the potential for beauty. I didn't know what to call that. And no one in the field at that time had talked about it. And then years later, I discovered the three principles that Sydney Banks brought to the world of mind, thought, and consciousness. And then I really began to see that what I called love, which could also be called God, which could also be called wisdom, was that unbroken, unshakable, creative conscious force within all human beings that could not be destroyed, and that it was possible to listen really deeply for that in people, and that's what I'd been doing, and watching that flower, because it's something that when you notice it, it grows. When you comment on it, it grows. When you become conscious of it, it grows. And so that deepened my understanding of listening. It was no longer just about having empathy and really understanding where people were coming from. It was about knowing and helping them see that there was this conscious creative ability within them that they could always access, and helping them listen for that. That is kind of a long-winded answer, but listening is a complex topic. I wish we had, more than an hour and a half to really go into it. But it's to me, it's just vital for all of us to be able to listen to each other, and to be able to listen beyond the level of form, beyond the level of what it is to be human and what it is to have feelings, but also for the connection that is beyond that, that is our shared love.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I can totally relate when you're saying what you're saying about learning how to listen. I think most people, I mean, I think we all have to learn. I don't think anybody really, it's we all have the innate capacity, but nobody points us to that. I
Yeah.
remember the first time I took like a communication course, and I remember the first time I became aware, like literally, like really aware that when people were talking, sure, I was listening to the content, so in that sense, I've always been a good information listener kind of person. I was listening to the voice in my head. I had
Mm.
a running commentary, judging, debating, what do I say next, all sorts of things. I had a parallel voice going on, so I could, yes, hear the information to respond or whatever, take notes. But I wasn't like, it was so superficial. And I didn't even know I had this voice running at the same time. It blew my mind. It blew, like, I was shocked. And then I started to learn, but I really like how the three principles it talks to, like, there's infinite levels of listening, because I feel like not only you're never done learning it, um, but you can listen to the same thing at a different level, hear something different that really comes from that deepest place. And so now, like, that is something I pay a lot of attention to when I feel like I'm stuck in something, or I'm having I don't know, an experience I don't like or whatever.
Mhm.
um I go into more listening. It even
Mm.
just happened. I went to a meetup. I had some conversation afterwards of really reflecting, and then I was like, wow, I wasn't listening a certain way, or I wasn't, all the answers were in the listening. So to me, that's become a huge, not only a huge part of my own personal practice, not just professional, but really personal. But I feel like we're still mainstream, like light years away from really talking, like it's not something you can take a course and you're done. Like it is a seriously deep practice. And I really like how you talked about listening to yourself. I found, yes, that for me got a lot deeper and deeper, and I really saw, like, wow, that's a whole world right there.
Mhm.
But listening
Right.
to others, listening to the world, listening, yeah, it's hard to put it into words. That's the whole point.
Years ago, I listened to a set of tapes that George Pransky, who's a very well-known teacher of the three principles, had released. And George spoke of something he called synergistic listening.
Mm.
And he described it as listening with the willingness to be influenced.
Right.
And so I'm you know, just to give a real life example, example that a lot of people are dealing with these days. I'm a progressive, left-leaning Democrat from a family that is a conservative Republican family, and very very much behind former President Trump. And the whole divisive thing we've been through in our country and the polarization in politics has really afforded me incredible opportunities to listen. And sometimes when I'm listening to my family speak about their political leanings, which are so diametrically opposed to mine, I remember George and this notion of synergistic listening. And I'll think, okay, I want to listen to my brother or my mother, my other brother, my sister, with a willingness to be influenced by what they're saying, not just not
Mm.
just to hear it and be able to parrot it back, but to be really influenced by it. And I think that's really fascinating because sometimes the influence is just about being touched emotionally by where they're coming from. Oh, so that's the way they put that together. It isn't that they're going to change my mind all the time, but just that I walk away seeing that they're doing the best they can see to do with their thinking to make sense of a world that is very complex. And I'm doing the best I can see to do with my thinking to make sense of a world that feels very complex. But that at the heart of it, the content of our thinking doesn't have to take us away from love. That it's quite possible to stay, and I have done this, to stay very engaged with my family, very loving of my family, very connected of my family, even though at the level of what we do with thought in the form, we have very different experiences of this world. And boy, that's been really incredible. It's a level of listening that isn't necessarily easy and takes some degree of practice, I think, but also takes a really deep awareness that at some level we are all the same, that we are all using the same energy to create what we're experiencing. But if there's any hope for us moving forward in greater peace, it's by going to that level that is before form,
Mm.
before what we do with the content of our thinking, and being in that place where we say, hey, we love each other. How do we consciously create a loving experience here, even though we create separate realities with our thinking?
Do you find that makes you less afraid?
Less afraid? Is that what you
Mhm.
said?
Yeah.
Most of the time, I'm not perfectly, but most of the time, it helps me have a trust that there is a greater reality than I can see operating here. There is a greater love operating here. And I don't know where it's all going to land. And I'm just one tiny sand particle in the great ongoing blanket of it. Uh, but in the short span that I'm here, I have a choice. Am I going to be a choice? Am I going to be an agent of division and fear and judgment? Or, as you pointed out, am I going to be, in a place of saying that there's something beyond this judging, evaluating, non-listening kind of thought stream that goes on in my head, that is the place where I can remember what really matters.
Yeah, I used to be very, very afraid of listening to people that had opinions that are very different than mine,
Hmm.
and I had, a sort of realization. This is many years ago where I really realized, wow, I'm really closed off and I'm afraid, like, they'll take me over, like, and then I sort of realized, oh, I can listen to all sorts of people, and actually, it like the influencing what I think when I heard this is I had this realization before listening to George Pransky, but I think the way he says it, so you listen, so it will influence you. It's a little scary to me the way he says it, because it sounds like, now you're gonna let this idea in and you're gonna. But what I really found for myself is that once I found that I have my grounding, I have this place inside me that knows what to me makes sense or not, or where I find my own really grounding, that I can listen to things and I can trust myself, and
Hmm.
that has made me less afraid, because I realize that a lot of people, when you listen to them, you do find exactly what you're saying. Like, you find, oh, we're all human, we're all having certain things, and then there is still some pretty scary stuff out there, but then the scary
Hmm.
stuff becomes much less to me. Like, I realize, oh, but there's a goodness, or there's a common humanity. So I found, for me, the practice of being more open to listening, it made me less afraid, but not less discerning, but not more wishy-washy, but not more confused, just less afraid, and a more
Hmm.
gentle knowing. And yeah, I like this word discernment. It's not used a lot, but I even wrote something about discernment versus judgment. Like, discernment means you know what's right or wrong to you, but you're not in this sort of like you have to judge everybody and protect, it makes you stronger in many ways and more resilient. So that's just my experience, but it was very countercultural to me. It was
Yeah.
very countercultural because I felt that I had grown up with the mentality, and I think this is, I don't know, to me it's a little bit like the common mentality in general, that you have to be very strong, you have to win the argument, do not listen to sort of like a very like I don't know, to me, I realized later it was full of fear, this fear. And instead, I found I can trust myself. I can really trust, and listening really helps. So that's, and then I have my limits too, though. I would like to be all like, I can listen to anything. No, I have my limits.
Right,
Right?
right.
But really, the fear is what I realized went away. A lot of the fear went away. Yeah.
And it's a fascinating conversation for our times, isn't it? Because there are certainly some things that I see that people believe that feel very dangerous to me, and that violate what I think of as my moral code, and seem unjust. So I'm not talking in talking about listening. I'm not talking about and will listening with the willingness to be influenced. I'm not talking about condoning, but just being able to listen with to think there's something in here that this person believes and is saying that they hold very dear for some reason. And if I listen deeply enough, I may hear the fear, I may hear the anguish, I may hear the bewilderment. I hear a lot of that. There are a lot of people who feel very bewildered by the world, the degree of upheaval and change we're going through. That doesn't mean I agree with it. But if I listen quietly with the willingness to be influenced by that, and I say, wow, I can really, I can really get a sense of why that feels so important to you. I understand that now. And as I say that, I feel the level of tension and the level of conflict go down. I feel a beautiful feeling come up of, oh, I feel safer now. I feel understood. And I know that in that condition, when people feel safer and understood, they are more likely to have their own insights
Well, that's the other thing. Yeah.
that shift them in new directions. I don't have any control over that. They're
Right.
100% control and have the power to shift or not shift. All I can do is make a conscious choice to be present in such a way that I am creating conditions where greater insight and spiritual consciousness can emerge. And to me, that's the power of what George Pransky was pointing to, that if I'm listening, not to just say, okay, I get it. This is the content of what you think, but let me really understand how you're using the power of thought to come up with this opinion or this judgment or this stance, and really hear it and really hear where it's coming from so that you feel safe, you feel heard, you feel understood. And then the guard drops, and then there's openness for real dialogue to occur and the possibility of insight to occur, and that's where change can happen.
Yeah. Wow. I wish we could talk for a lot longer about this. So it's such an important topic. All
Yeah.
right. Okay, I want to talk about your memoir, Leaning into
Mhm.
Curves. What a beautiful also title with multiple meanings. So your memoir, Leaning into Curves, came out this year. So the
Mhm.
first thing is that I'm really curious about what it was like for you to write it.
Well, it was a learning experience, and it changed me. It was not written quickly. I worked on it on and off for 4 years, and it was a beautiful opportunity to tell a love story, the love story I had with my late husband. Really, my first thought about writing it was I want to write something that leaves for my grandchildren who never met their Grandpa Jim a little bit of a glimpse of who he was. He was a really remarkable human being. And I feel very privileged and honored that I got to spend 25 years in relationship with him. And then as I started writing, I thought, oh, and I have this beautiful story of meeting Bill and meeting Sydney Banks and having my personal and professional life transformed by this three principles understanding. And I knew I didn't want to write a three principles how-to book. There are plenty of those. I just wanted to write something that was a story about how I came to it and how I fought it, and how I fought the understanding, and how eventually it just started to make sense to me and seemed to provide an underlying logic for how love worked. And uh, and I learned from writing that, really thinking through, how did this change me? I had some insights about my own life along the way that I didn't expect to have, which was really beautiful. I was challenged by a number of editors to write deeper than the first couple of drafts were, to really be more honest and forthcoming about some of my experiences. There are a few things in the book that when I first wrote them down, I thought I couldn't share this with the world. It would be too embarrassing. But I was encouraged by a very wise editor and writing teacher to go ahead and write everything down and make decisions at the very end to pull things back if I needed to for one reason or another, but to at least allow it to breathe on the page. And that was it was insight provoking to do that. I saw things in new ways, which was really beautiful, through more loving eyes. That was one thing that was really important to me. When I first started writing, I made a conscious choice. I want, as much as I'm capable of, to tell some of these stories that I want to tell through the eyes of love.
That definitely came through. That was really my feeling reading it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that probably in a few areas meant doing some additional forgiveness work. Forgiveness work for myself, for others, for life, because life is not easy for most of us. And I often find that the people I work with forgive themselves, they might forgive others, but they struggle to forgive life. Like, I shouldn't have gotten this deal, right? Well, we all get pretty difficult deals to deal with. And I think the memoir really, yeah, took me another step along my own spiritual evolution in the area of love and forgiveness. So that was really beautiful.
Can you say more about that? About something that you saw writing that maybe you hadn't realized before, or what you saw in a deeper way about these things that, we resist that happen to us?
Um, well, one of the things that comes to mind is that, and I didn't get into a lot of detail with about the particulars of this, but I do write in the book very openly that my late husband and I were separated for several years, and we hit a really rough patch in our marriage and just couldn't seem to find our way around an impasse. And then a couple of years down the road, we were reconciled, and it happened very quickly. I think both of us just had a spontaneous dramatic insight that took us to a place of real forgiveness, and we reunited, moved back in together, and then 6 months later he died in an automobile accident. So I was really grateful that we had found our way back and had gotten reconciled and enjoyed 6 months of a very peaceful, loving relationship before he died. But as I was writing that story, although I didn't go into detail about a lot of it in the book, because the book would have gotten to be 3 times bigger than it was, and it's already a fairly long book, I really saw even more deeply than I had then how innocent we were. For example, there was a 20-year age difference between my late husband, Jim, and I. When I married him, I was 24, he was 44. And we were so in love that the age difference seemed completely not an issue, right? He was a very young 44, and I was probably a pretty mature 24. So it didn't feel like that big of a deal. But there are developmental things that people go through along the lifespan. And I think it's fair to say that when we separated, I was beginning my midlife time, and I was really looking around at my life saying, there are some things I'd really like to change up. I haven't experienced yet. But he was at a place in his life where he was starting to sort of like consolidate and say, I've lived a full life. I don't need to accomplish a lot of things. I really want to live quietly and enjoy certain things that are very important to me. So there were some developmental pulls in our relationship that I don't think back then I could really have compassion for myself about. And as I was writing my memoir, I was thinking, wow, at 70, I look back and I was widowed at age 46. That's very young. And then I thought through all the things that I'd gone through before the age of 46, being alongside a man who left his priesthood in the Roman Catholic Church, being alongside a man who had fought a terrific battle against alcoholism, uh, being alongside a man who, like me, wanted to go live in the wilds of West Virginia and all that that meant. I, my compassion for how young I was and how much resilience and maturity and love and faith I brought to that process. I had spent a lot of years beating myself up for some of the choices that I'd made, and some of them that had difficult consequences for me and for other people, including my separation from Jim and the impact that had on our daughter. But the memoir, I don't know, just really took me to a place where it was like, wow, Linda, you are an amazing woman. At a very young age, you moved through things that demanded an incredible amount of emotional maturity and stamina and perseverance and forbearance and fortitude. There's nothing for you to be ashamed of. There is nothing for you to not forgive yourself for. You need to stand in honor and truth and beauty for all the love you brought to your experience. Yeah, I would say that was pretty profound.
It really moved me. Like
Mm,
hearing you say, like the way you said it right now, I found it very moving. I think that a lot of us had that experience of beating ourselves up.
yeah,
And then as we get older, if we're lucky, we start experiencing some tenderness and
yeah.
understanding and
Oh,
compassion.
tenderness. That's such a beautiful
Yeah,
word.
yeah.
Perfect. It's perfect, Aurora.
That's really what was coming to me from what you were saying right now. That, yeah, yeah. And the feeling in the book is so beautiful, and I
Mm,
feel like you share so many ups and downs of life and some really, really, really sad, like the loss of your husband and it's just this beautiful feeling where we get to be alongside you and there's a support there, that maybe it's the you now, the wisdom now that comes
mm,
through. There's one of the things that I really like that you talk a lot about in your work is grief, and how you really you know how you dealt with it. I don't know if dealing with it is the right word, but how you experienced it. And I remember in your book there is this beautiful part where you really, at some point, you realize you want to feel gratitude and love. You want to,
mm.
I don't know if you remember that, if you want to say a little bit about it.
Oh, I do. It was a profound moment. Jim had died. He died Christmas Eve, and this was, I think, in February. So it was only like 2 to 2.5 months after he had died. And I was in really, really deep grief. And I was behind the house we had built in the hollow, in the hills of West Virginia, very isolated, no visible neighbors in the woods. And we burnt wood to keep the house warm. We had a heat pump, but it was so expensive to run it. We kept the house through wood fire, warm through the winter. And it had been Jim's job to move the wood from the wood bin, which was away from the house, because in West Virginia, where this was, there are a lot of copperhead snakes. So you don't ever want your wood bin close to the house because the snakes tend to get into the wood. So in the wintertime, we would have to move the wood from the wood bin, not that far, maybe 200 feet over to the um, deck that was right outside where the wood burning stove was. And that had been Jim's job to move that wood. Well, we had had a big snowfall. It was probably about 24 inches, so 2 feet of snow. And I had to get wood over to the bin. So I'm tromping through the snow with this wood, putting it in the wood bin, and just feeling so angry with Jim and shouting to the skies, "What were you thinking? How could you have left me? This is not fair that I'm stuck doing your job." And I mean, I'm laughing about it now. I was not laughing in that moment. I was really raging. I was so angry. And then, I mean, I remember I was covered and caked with ice. My feet were freezing. Uh, my snot had frozen on my face. It was really cold. It was below zero. And I stood there for a minute and I just got distracted and was watching the bird feeders. Jim had strung bird feeders behind the house. He loved to watch the birds. And I was watching them feed and it just suddenly got aware of how quiet it was. I mean, where I lived, you couldn't hear traffic from anywhere. It was just stone silent, except for the chatter of a few birds and maybe some rustling of the deer or small animals in the forest. But I don't think you heard much of it right then because the snow was so deep. But it was so quiet. And I remember thinking, wow, Jim, thank you. Thank you for being willing to come to this wild place and for us to find the money and find the way to build this beautiful home. And thank you for teaching me how to enjoy the birds and how to enjoy silence. Jim loved nature. And I was overwhelmed with gratitude in that moment. I remember just being so filled up that I got this opportunity to be in this beautiful place and that I owned that beautiful home. And I all of a sudden stopped and thought, wait a minute, I have moved in less than a minute from being raging and in deep grief to being grateful and feeling full of love. How did that happen? And I had no words for that. I remember standing there for a while just thinking, what was the mechanism of that? It was a lot. How did I make myself do that? And then I just thought, you know what? It it appears that I have a choice to be either angry and upset about something that is absolutely unchangeable. I have no power to change it. Or I can shift the way I look at it and be grateful for and enjoy about the love that I experienced with my late husband. I have a choice here to be either in grief or gratitude. Now, it wasn't until a number of years later that I actually saw the logic of what had happened, that as my mind quieted down, as it was distracted, and I was enjoying the birds and enjoying the silence and feeling filled up in the quiet, that the natural love that I am just came forward. And I was filled with this sense of peace, love, and gratitude. As soon as my personal thinking just kind of moved out of the way, that's what was underneath it. I didn't see that at that time. All I saw was that I had a choice and that it felt a whole lot better to be in gratitude and love and appreciation, because that's really what I felt for Jim, was grateful, appreciative, and loving. And I didn't really want to have temper tantrums about the fact that events outside of my control had taken me and taken that from me. So I wouldn't say that that resolved my grief. In fact, I grieved hard. I grieved for 18 months before I started to feel like I was coming to a place of equilibrium with it. But whenever I would get really lost in a moment, I would know that if I could just find my way to an appreciation of something around me, that I would reconnect with this beautiful feeling of love. And I preferred to be there. So that really started to soften, you use your word, your beautiful word, bring a tenderness to the grief experience that was really valuable to me.
Yeah, I remember that moment in the book. It was really beautiful to read it. Thank you so much for sharing. I think, you know, um, yeah, there's so many things about the book. I'm gonna let people read the rest because I feel like otherwise there's so much. But I do have a super quick question because I also really love the work of Dr. Bill Pettit, who's your husband now. And how did he take what you shared about him in the book? I thought that was that was quite a surprise. You don't have to tell us all, but I'm just curious.
Oh yeah, that was fun. Yeah, when I was writing this book, I wanted to be as real as I could. And that included putting in some little bits of information about sexual experiences that I've had. And I think there's one place where I say Bill was laying, naked on the duvet cover, and I wish that I was that comfortable with my own body as he was with his. And I was very sensitive, obviously, to the fact that Bill is known in the three principles world and in the medical world for the work that he does. So toward the end of the process, I said, okay, honey, I'm ready for you to read the book now. And I want you to know that if there's anything that you feel uncomfortable with, I can take it out. And I'd like to have a conversation with you about it, but I'm 100% open to removing things because I don't want you to feel any degree of discomfort about the fact that it's being put out this way. And he read it. And there actually was one chapter that, interestingly enough, was not about any of the more human kinds of stuff. It was a chapter on separate realities, where, for whatever reason, he had a little bit of reservation. He felt like I had sort of, I wouldn't say misrepresented, but that I hadn't fully explained his view of the thing. And I was going to rewrite that section, but the book had gotten overly long. And I said to him, you know what? That point is actually already made elsewhere in the book. So I think I can just take that out. And he was relieved. He was happy with that. So, yeah, he absolutely blessed everything that was there. In fact, even asked me to add a few things that he thought from his perspective would help people understand how he and I were navigating the whole world of the three principles understanding. So he was extremely supportive.
No, I loved it. It's great. And I personally, just as a reader, I always like when people who teach spirituality or psychology or anything like that actually tell stories like
Mhm.
about things, especially if they're even their own, because to me that makes it more real. Like
Yeah.
sometimes you read, the what can seem like theory, you're like, oh, that would be nice. you know, sounds great. But I feel like when I read a story, and especially like a teacher, like somebody teaches this thing, like what they've been through or how they handle things from, like, to me, it makes it much more relatable. I feel like more like, oh, that is possible. This is what it would look like. So I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed that you wrote a memoir. That was really cool. All right, so wow, I can talk to you forever. Let's start wrapping it up. And I think you sort of answered a lot of my other questions. So I want to ask you just two more questions. Well,
Sure.
three, but the last one is not a real question. Like it's anyway, two and a half, two and a wrap up question. So the next one is really, what is one message you would like everyone to take from your book? Okay. Like, what is one thing that if anybody read that book and they forgot everything and didn't get anything, but one thing you would like them to really get?
Mm. In a way, I suppose it's in the title that that if you lean into the curves, if you lean into everything that is in front of you, if you don't resist it, you go with it, that you will be guided through it. And I use the word intuitive deliberately, uh, and it came off of a quote of Sid Banks, my spiritual teacher, and that is in the book, In Quest of the Pearl. And Sid wrote, he actually used the word aloha, but then he said aloha is love. And so when I think of this quote, I think of it as starting with love. Um, Love is an intuitive way of life,
Mm.
knowing what to do and when to do it, trusting with great faith in the abundance behind life. And that's really what life has taught me, I think, is that if I don't resist what comes my way in life and I lean into it, that even the really, really hard stuff and the really, really fun stuff, I will be guided through it. I will know what to do and when to do it if my heart is quiet and open and trusting. And that is, I tried to tell that through many, many stories in the book of how that happened in different circumstances. And that's my I think of as the number one message, that if you do that, you can't help but have a beautiful life.
Beautiful. All right, so I feel like you already answered this, but I'm always asking everybody. So I'm gonna ask you
Uh-huh.
again. You give me
Yeah,
the short
sure.
version, and it's
I
really
love
like,
it.
what does inner wisdom mean to you?
Well, I want to hedge a bit and say that recently I've been thinking a lot about how different people may experience inner wisdom differently.
Hmm.
So I'll defer to Sydney Banks again for the what I think of as the central piece. There is a place, I believe it's in Quest of the Pearl as well, where Sid says, uh, wisdom comes not with the roar of a lion, it comes with the beat of a lamb.
Hmm.
It is a whisper. It is never disturbing.
Hmm.
Now that's interesting. He then goes on to say a little bit further down on the page where that quote occurs that sometimes when we hear wisdom, the ego, the intellect gets jarred.
Hmm.
It goes crazy. I can't do that. That can't be the right answer. No way, Jose. And then we get confused because we attach the jarring to wisdom. But the jarring has nothing to do with wisdom. It's just the intellect that wants to stay in the comfort zone of the known, having a bit of a reaction, at least initially, to some wisdom that's coming up. But I think people experience that wisdom a little differently. Like for me, it's more of a, I don't know how to explain it. It's more of a mind thing. It's kind of an acoustic thing. I hear things. I hear like a voice inside my head that, like I described earlier, turn right, turn left, go to the CVS. Uh, when I met Jim and then when I met Bill, there was this immediate knowing that I was meant to have a relationship with those two men. I don't know how to describe that, but it just was like an inner mental knowing. I have worked with enough people at this point to know that some people experience inner wisdom as sort of a soft feeling in their heart. The heart's intelligence. They like to speak about it that way. My heart just knew the right thing. Some people will say, oh, I just had a gut instinct, a gut sense that this was the right thing to do. Other people will say, I checked in and I get this clear yes or this clear no. And so I think maybe we all might experience it sensorily a little bit differently. But ultimately, what I like to think of about intuition or intuitive wisdom is that it's moments when the spiritual eyes of love fly wide open and we see clear possibility.
Hmm. Wow.
And the way that comes through sensorially to us may be very different, but everyone has some way.
Yeah, I love that. I always tell my clients like you have to understand your own system. Like I can tell you what it feels like to me, but like
Yeah.
you have your own way. The whole
Yeah.
the whole game here is that we understand our own way, right? Because we do have
Yeah.
it. And
Yeah.
and we're made to like, yeah.
How does that feel to you? I mean, how do
Does that
you?
feel to me? So sometimes I've heard a voice, like
Yeah.
literally like a voice saying, which is so bizarre because it was always like out of the blue and sort of like that. What is he saying even now, right? Most often for me, it's a feeling.
Yeah.
So I feel it in my body, like I feel something. Usually it's a peaceful feeling, a feeling of like, or like it's a feeling more like a mental feeling, like, oh yeah, of course, like that. Sometimes it's a memory, like a memory comes with clarity. As if like on its own, I was going back, rewatching the movie, I'd be like, no, 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 this is what you missed. And the whole thing changes. So sometimes that's
Wow.
also.
Yeah.
Um, so those are the, I think those are the main ways that it comes to me, but it's very clear
Yeah.
when it's happening. But I feel I
Yeah.
had to learn to trust it though, because
Yeah.
I was very scared and very confused for the longest time when I was younger. So I would really not know, very confused, a lot of resistance, you know. So for me, that was the hardest part. And that's why I think for some of us, that's the hard part.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
trusting.
How do you define inner wisdom? I'd love to hear your definition.
I'm so not prepared. Wait, what? um, so to me, it's very hard to define it. That's why I like to ask everybody. I think it's a knowing. You know, to me, it's
Hmm.
a knowing, but it's not an intellectual knowing. So it's not like I think about it and then I have the answer intellectually. If it, to me, it feels like it spontaneously comes inside out, but from nothing, like it blooms. That's how it really feels. This sort of like, and there's there's no doubt. Like the doubt can be added later, like, oh no, should I, you know, why is this voice talking to me? But there's no doubt. Like one of, you know, somebody that we're still very good friends, but it was a very significant partner in my life. So I'm somebody very safe, okay? So I would not, you know, do things like getting into a car with somebody, I don't know, whatever. And this many years ago, I met this guy online, and we met for the first time. And then he said, oh, can I give you a ride back home? Which to me would be absolutely not, you know. And I had this feeling, like this sort of feeling, like as if my mother had asked me, can I give you a ride home? Like this
Yeah.
completely safe, like, and so I said yes, you know. And decades later, I mean, it's still like a super important, it's like family. But I remember afterwards, you know, I told my friend, and she was like, "How, God, what? Some guy?" And yeah, she was right. I mean, I would never ever do that. I would be like, absolutely, don't do that. But it
Yeah.
was this knowing out of the blue that it was family, and
Yeah.
and this is anybody listening to this. This is not a thought you have. So this is why to me it feels very differently, because it's not a thought, it's not a rationalization or a justification or a pros and cons, or it's like an unexpected that's just what is.
Yeah.
And the other thing I've learned is that it comes when we're calm. In most cases. So the more we practice having a calm, quiet mind, we're not in the constant throes of emotionality or something, the easier it is to hear it. If we're always very caught up, very emotional, it's harder in my experience. So the more I also started to practice just being quiet, listening to myself, like you were saying, like then, because it is subtle,
Hmm.
you know. If
Yeah,
yeah.
it is. And you just reminded me of something. I also I absolutely 100% agree that when I'm calmer and a clearer state of mind or a quieter feeling, that it's much easier to hear my inner wisdom. But I also, Aurora, used to wonder why intuition seems so strong for me right after my husband's death. You know, in that first year, I felt like I was intuitively guided through so many things, so many pieces. And I'd always, so I'd say, well, I wasn't quiet in that period. You know, my mind was just going crazy trying to figure out, why did this happen to me? Could I have prevented it? How am I going to do this? How am I going to do that? What happens with this? What happens with that? There were so many things to deal with, as anyone who knows about a family member, especially a spouse who's had a sudden death. There's just a lot to do. And yet intuition felt so strong. And then it occurred to me that just actually this year when I was in Prague uh, doing a speaking engagement, I was on the stage with Jacqueline Hollows. And we were having the same discussion about how intuition is courted by a quiet mind and, a quiet heart and a nice feeling, a calmness. And meanwhile, as we're talking, I'm in my head thinking, yeah, but what about when I was really messed up and still felt like intuition was guiding me? And it suddenly occurred to me that the answer was humility,
Mm,
that that's
yes.
another condition under which inner wisdom really breaks through when we are in a place of just like I do know that I was so humbled because I thought, I don't know. I've never had the experience of losing a husband. I've never had the experience of dealing with all the aftermath of that. I have not had the experience of raising a 14-year-old bereaved child on my own. I do not know what to do. I feel very lost. And in that humility, it was like, and I was asking God for help. Please help me. Please guide me. And the guidance, I have never had a period in my life since then, I don't think, where the guidance has felt so pure and so strong.
Yeah, what you said about humility really resonates with me. I think yes. I think and I think there's a whole tradition of like looking at, depression as a dark night of the soul, as
Yeah.
something
Oh,
where
yeah.
we let go, that sometimes it's through a dark time that we finally give up some of our ways of controlling and I know
Yeah.
better,
Yeah.
and then some real guidance comes. But
Yeah.
hopefully, that's not the way to get. There's other ways to get guidance, But
Yeah.
to me, it's interesting that, probably a lot of us have had an experience where we really were down and we finally gave up on some things, on some control, and then we had guidance. Yeah. I never thought about humility, but to me, it resonates what you're saying. Yeah.
It's hopeful, isn't it? Because all of us are going to have tough things to deal with, have had, are having, or will have tough things to deal with. It's kind of hopeful to me to know that when we have those tough things and we feel very humbled by life because we've never been through what we're going through. I often feel that way about aging, like I was talking to my doctor, my orthopedic surgeon, a couple of months ago about a shoulder repair that I had, a rotator cuff repair. And I was really frustrated. And I said to him, why am I not getting better? And he said, well, Linda, I think what I have in front of me is a 35-year-old mind that doesn't know that it's in a 70-year-old body. But I got to chuckling and he and I had a big laugh about it. I said, I don't know how to be 70.
Mm,
I've never been 70.
mm.
I have no idea how I'm going to be 80. I've never been 80. My mother is 93. Chances are I'll live into my 90s because all of her family did. I won't know how to be 90. But in the humility of that, in the humility of not knowing, that's exactly the condition under which I'll be guided to know how to move through something that I have no experience base for. And that's just the way it is all the time.
Oh, that's so beautiful. All right, so here's my real last
Yes.
question. Okay, before I wrap this up, where can people find you if they want to get in touch with you? And are you working on anything new right now? Tell us a little bit about you and your plans and how to get in touch.
Thank you for that opportunity. I know you and I have a feeling could talk for hours and hours. Um, well, the easiest way to get in touch with me is through my website, Linda, Linda, Sandel, Sandel, Pettit.com. There's a contact form on that website that comes directly to my email. So it's tested every month to make sure it works. So that's the best way to get in touch with me. And I'm continuing to do my one-on-one conversations with people. I'm planning for some book circles on leaning into curves this fall. And I'm writing my second book, which is called Magic, Releasing the Power of Spiritual Consciousness, which is a little bit more of a self-help book combined with memoir storytelling, hoping to have that out by the first part of next year.
Fantastic. I can't wait. All right, I'll have all your website and everything here so people can click and find you really easily, including your book and podcast. And for everybody here with us, my name is Aurora Menegallo. You can find more about me and my work at repurposeyourpurpose.com. Thank you so much, Linda.
Thank you, Aurora. Thanks for having me.